Age before beauty, right, guys? Well, it turns out the American electorate still seems to think so anyway as of today. Look at these numbers. 42-year Senate vet Thad Cochran won his Mississippi primary. 44-year congressional vet Charlie Rangel is on his way to win in New York, it seems. And Bill Clinton came to the defense of his wife, who may be looking to be president number 45. All right, let's get to it. A lot to unpack here politically. Joining me now, former Pennsylvania Governor Ed Rendell, an MSNBC contributor, Karen Finney, former comms director at the DNC and also an MSNBC contributor, and David Avella. He's the president of GOPAC, a Republican advocacy group. So we got the full range of perspectives here. Let's get into it. Governor, I'll start with you. This was the first major Republican primary matchup since Tea Party candidate Dave Bratt, of course, crushed Eric Cantor 2 weeks ago. The Wall Street Journal wrote that the #1 takeaway from last night's results was we're back to a pre-David Bratt world. In terms of the future of the Tea Party, which one of these races was the outlier, do you think?
Well, neither. I think, look, building a party or a movement like the Tea Party, there are ups and downs to it. There's no immediate success, there's no string of successes, and there's also no string of defeats. Remember, what they did in forcing a very popular 42-year senator into a runoff to begin with, that was a fairly significant achievement. Did they lose? Yeah, they lost because all of the political forces in Mississippi, including the Barbers, and Haley Barbour is still almost like God in Mississippi, were arrayed against them, #1. And #2, the Cochran forces were very clever to appeal to Democratic voters. It is an open primary. There's nothing illegal about it. And I think it was Democratic voters that probably made the difference.
Well, and let's look at that question. David, it seems like Cochran really eked out this victory in part due to these Democratic voters. And actually, specifically, African-American voters seemed to turn out. This is one example that really I found interesting. Hinds County, Mississippi, a district that's 70% black, didn't play basically any role in the June 3rd primary. And yet, in this most recent runoff, Cochran won there by 72% with 18,000 votes. So he got new voters out this time around, and particularly some of these Democratic and black voters. McDaniel seemed to take issue with that. Should voters take issue with it? Is there anything deceptive about it?
A host of folks woke up this morning having voted Republican for the first time, and they get to celebrate a victory and potentially have advanced their ideas and said, gosh, voting Republican felt pretty good. Maybe I'm going to do that again.
No,
and that would happen now.
Wow, spinning it positive.
Nice
I like
wishful
it.
thinking.
Well, it happened on both sides, though. While Senator Cochran brought many people into the Republican coalition, so did Chris McDaniel. And for our party, that is a long-term good thing. As far as for the Tea Party, they have to start, we have to, as a coalition, start deciding where we're going to start focusing our battle. Are we going to look at primaries, or are we going to look at the folks who are actually doing things that stop the ideas we're trying to advance? Whether that be things like creating jobs with the Keystone Pipeline, whether that's trying to bring a reasonableness to the healthcare system. Let's focus on who is really the enemy, and it's really having Harry Reid as the Senate Majority Leader blocking what's trying to come out of the House.
I mean, certainly cross-party pollination should not be the enemy, right? Karen, you've got some thoughts, it seems like.
Yeah, well, absolutely, because, I mean, I think that this is something nobody's really talking about, and you touched on it. Look at what happened in Hinds County in terms, I mean, that is a high percentage African-American, that includes Jackson, Mississippi. So clearly, if you look at the votes, I think it's about 4,000 additional votes. Changing the electorate, I mean, this is a big feature of what happened in this election, and that there's a national message in that. That is what Barack Obama was able to do 2 times. That is what is happening in this country. That is how you have to win. Outside of these sort of gerrymandered House districts, when we're talking about the state level and we're talking about the federal level, this idea of changing the electorate is critical. So 2 messages. #1, I want African-American voters to take a look at this and see when you turn out, you can make the difference. That's why turnout is so important. But #2, this idea of changing the electorate for the GOP, they've got to realize, Tea Party or not, there simply are not enough older white voters, which is a lot of the base of the Republican Party, to change the electorate. So if you're going to change the electorate in states and nationally, again, immigration reform, some of these other issues that appeal to African-American and Latino communities, they really need to start changing their tune.
And
there's Well, I want to have time to get to some of the other races here. So let's look at how these racial dimensions are playing out in some of those. New York is one big contentious one. It's actually so close it hasn't officially been called yet. That being said, Charlie Rangel does look like the winner so far, and he was actually just on our air saying he was sure it was going to be a victory and was ready to move on to mending divisions within his district. But if he wins, it'll be by a really small margin, by less than 2,000 votes potentially. Should these tiny margins that we're seeing encourage voter turnout? Should people feel more empowered to change the outcomes here, Governor?
Well, sure they should. But one thing I wanted to say about our last discussion, because it's important, it shows the value of open primaries. Every state should have open primaries. My state doesn't. We tried to get it, but we should have it because that allows parties to go after other voters, to broaden their base and broaden their appeal, but it also means that moderation has a chance to succeed in primaries when you have open primaries. Very important point.
That's a huge point, Governor, and I love hearing from the Tea Party that they have this populist, counter-establishment ideology, and I think a lot of young, frustrated voters wish that that would extend across the political spectrum, really, to being more open-minded about having all voters of all creeds, of all political denominations weigh in on all these races. I think it's a great point.
And we haven't talked about, when I say we, most of our shows haven't talked much about California, where they're having basically nonpartisan elections, and they pick the top two, and if the top two are Democrats, they are on the ballot in November. If the top two are Republicans, they're on the ballot in November. We need to break the hold that both bases and both political parties have because of closed primaries. Very important.
But Governor, if you're raising that point, it has to be said, the critique from the other side of that debate is always, well, that can cause an opening for opposition parties to stack these competitions. What do you think of that critique?
Well, you know, I think voters are smarter than that. I think the voters in Mississippi who voted, the Democrats who voted for Thad Cochran, were persuaded that he had brought home from Washington things that were important in their lives. We always underestimate the intelligence of voters. Voters won't be used. Voters will vote their interest, and I think in Thad Cochran's case, they voted for someone who had produced.
David,
Ronan,
what does it say about voters' relationship with age in both of these races, seeing really the old guard that we just talked about, people potentially being frustrated with, get back into power again? What do you think that suggests?
It's very hard to beat an incumbent. And unless you have a very compelling candidate with a convincing message as to why that incumbent needs to be fired, it's very difficult. But one point on what the governor was talking about, as we start to look towards the general election, Democrats coming and voting in Republican primaries are doing so because they're frustrated and angry with the way things currently are. That bodes very well for the party that is out of power, which happens to be the Republican Party. And as we try to pick up a Senate majority, Democrats who are willing to come vote in a Republican primary early in the year, you have a very good chance of getting them to come do that again in the general election. And if you're looking at political environments, it's pretty favorable for Republicans.
It's like, no, come on, it's a great talking point, and I know it's what you've got to say, but I mean, again, I think the motivation of those voters, particularly if we take a look in Mississippi and look at, I mean, some of the things that McDaniel has said. I mean, apparently Cochran's campaign didn't even use all of what they had. There was a serious motivation, I think a fear of this man, McDaniel, as their nominee, frankly. So I don't know that I'd say it's all about, hey, now maybe we'll vote Republican in a general election. I think there was a little bit different motivation than that.
Well, look, I will say it's nice to see nonpartisan frustration, whatever the implications of that for the next round of voting. So look, but before we let you guys go, we had to get to this latest sound of Bill Clinton defending Hillary Clinton. It's really going viral online. Of course, he was coming out really defending her against these charges that she's out of touch because she had made those dead broke comments saying that, you know, actually she wasn't that well off. That was a contentious claim, shall we say. Listen to him.
It is factually true that we were several $1 million in debt. I think I had the lowest net worth of any American president in the 20th century when I took office. But I still could have been tone deaf. And, you know, now I don't, and we've got a good life, and I'm grateful for it. But I still, we go to our local grocery store on the weekend. We talk to people in our town. We know what's going on. The real issue is, if you've been fortunate enough to be successful, are you now out of touch and insensitive to the agonizing struggles other people are facing?
Governor, why this general discomfort with talking about being wealthy. We elect hyper-wealthy candidates over and over again. Why don't we want our candidates to then fess up to that?
Well, the people don't care. The people will vote for extremely wealthy people like JFK, like FDR, as long as their policies are things that show that they understand the needs of ordinary working people or people who are vulnerable. So that's the key. I don't think this will do Hillary any damage, although I wish she had chosen better words, because she is for things like raising the minimum wage, which people who are in the poorer part of the American economy believe in. So I don't think it'll do her any long-term damage at all.
I mean, I got to say, that's the argument that resonates with me most as a voter. I look to how in touch the policies are on a fiscal level, not how in touch the biography is. All right, Governor Ed Rendell, Karen Finney, David Avella, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Ronan.
And up next, freedom